Welcome to Leadership and People. This is a series that pulls back the curtain on leadership by interviewing CEOs, senior executives, and entrepreneurs who have had large exits. We ask these experts about how they built trusted networks to rapidly grow their companies and what advice they wish they knew if they could do it all again. Today on the show, we've got Jeff Lyman.
Like, how do we, as quickly as we can, present to the homeowner what's going on in the front door, and then give them all sort of the optionality to decide to take action, but most importantly, to decide to not take action.
Thanks for making time.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So you're at Vivint these days. You came from 10 years at Nike. Tell us why Vivint's going to take over the world for people. For people around the country who may not know that you're basically making the smart home thing a big reality. What exactly Vivint's play is there, and where you see it going?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really fun time in our category. Is kind of the Internet of Things explosion here of the last 4 or 5 years that have affected so many businesses. You know, one of those sort of forerunners of that movement was bringing all of these sensors and connected capabilities into the smart home. So we started seeing, even as early as, Vivint started doing this in 2010, 2011 with connected thermostats that you could control with your phone, and connected locks and garage door control. And it's just started kind of working its way through the various kind of vital organs of the home. And you started to see groups like Nest, which was purchased by Google in 2014, and Samsung Smart Things, and really a pretty huge kind of crop of investment, really from some of the world's largest companies, certainly consumer tech brands, getting into the space. And early on, it's really just about building a gigantic remote control for your home using your phone. Think like the old universal remotes that worked, like from Logitech, that work with all these different things. That I think was sort of the early endeavor in this category. But over the last, I'd say, 24 to 36 months, the connectivity with basically anything in your house that can be connected, locks, lights, cameras, thermostats, everything else, is now really a solved problem. Now the opportunity is to build the self-driving home. It's not only to be able to have the homeowners control everything, but actually have the home be intelligent enough to control itself. And that isn't like a total robot is taking over your home, but anything that can deliver back to the consumer time and peace of mind and money is real value. And for a lot of things in the house, they're just hassles. They're all the things that when you were a renter, you didn't really have to deal with. And then when you become a homeowner, they're all like your problem. That's the future of smart home, is who's going to solve all of those problems using sensors and connectivity and AI capabilities. And so that's where our organization is focused now, is the connectivity and the placement of the sensors and sort of the market dynamics is what I think we're close to, I think, north of 1.3 million customers now. Those are things that we really feel like we've solved. The big opportunity now is how do you take all this data and this connectivity and wrap it together into really valuable autonomous solutions for customers. And that's what makes this category right now a really, really fun place to be.
Yeah, no kidding. How are you finding things changing in the consumer world with like the Teslas of the world and these people maybe changing old buying habits?
Yeah. So many ways to attack that. One, consumers are just incredibly knowledgeable when they buy anything. They love, they come into any purchase now, especially anything that's significant, like north of probably a couple of $100, really knowledgeable. And the internet is replete with research sources. And so it sort of built opportunities for companies like TrueCar and um, you know lots of other services that sort of say, hey, we're going to be a really powerful research tool for you, and then we'll simplify the actual transaction process. And we see that in our category as well. By the time we're interacting with a potential customer, whether it's in a Best Buy store where we have shop and shops, or it's over the phone or online or in person in like an in-home consultation, they already know our category pretty well, and they already have a pretty good sense of the types of problems that they want to solve. And that's new. That is, even 2 to 3 years ago, we felt like we were breaking the category and introducing the category. And now the category is pretty well understood. And customers are really just about trying to find, I think, the right match of capabilities that they're familiar with. It's going to meet their needs both now, but also as their life stages progress. And so that's been fun. I feel like with a lot more of our sales interactions, I'm doing a lot less of through my various kind of marketing channels, doing a lot less of explaining what the heck smart home is, and more about how Vivint's particular approach is really the best way to go.
Yeah. Well, and I'd be interested to hear, a decade at Nike, you got to be a part of a bunch of cool things. I'd love to hear, like, what'd you do with LeBron, and how did some of those Nike experiences translate to leading a team this direction nowadays?
Yeah. So that very early in LeBron's career, he started in the NBA in 2003. I started working on his business in 2004 and sort of worked up through like 2007. And those were kind of early days for him. If you're a basketball fan, you'll remember he sort of came in with insane amount of hype. Those were the days that you could come straight to the NBA out of high school. You can't do that anymore. And he was, on the cover of all the magazines and sort of deemed as this kind of chosen one. And Nike signed him to, I actually still have a copy of the contract, a super lucrative shoe contract um, for a young person who had never won a college basketball game, and it had kind of won an Ohio State championship. And that's and then you start throwing $15 million a year at someone like that for 7 years. It was really a big bet. And so we went to market with LeBron those first few years. And if anyone remembers some of that advertising, we bought this gigantic billboard in New York City on the corner of 34th and 7th, which is kind of this kind of major hub over by Penn Station, and we put LeBron on a throne with a pair of lions, and sort of told the story that the king had arrived, this chosen one.
Yeah.
And basketball is its own unique subculture, and it is the truest meritocracy that you can imagine. And so the kind of the culture of basketball reacted to that, saying, okay, you've put him on a throne, but he really has not won anything yet. He's playing in Cleveland, Ohio for a lottery team. And, this isn't Michael Jordan and 6 titles and gold medals and MVPs. This is a rookie, shooting 38%. And so those early years, there was definitely a little bit of a mismatch. And so Nike, as it's brilliant at, decided to go really deep into really the target customer, specifically like the 17-year-old athlete, and understand what they were thinking about him. And LeBron was just as much of a product as any shoe that we were shipping. He's actually more significant in that respect, but and so we need to understand why in those early days the product wasn't landing, and we saw that in sell through of the shoes, and I mean they were actually really great products. Some of the shoes are even brought out now as retros, and they sell through really, really fast. But in those days, it just wasn't happening in those first couple of years. So I can remember doing this huge, we used to call them digs, so it's short for deep insight gathering, that we sort of did across multiple cities all over the world. And you'd sit with these kind of 17-year-old kids, and we say, hey, let's talk about LeBron. And they all knew about him. They all were aware. And the feedback was pretty fascinating. But also very consistent. And they said, hey, you've put this guy on a throne, and we don't really know him yet. And he hasn't really won anything yet. And we're not in a hurry to go buy anything from him simply because he's been deemed by the authority of Nike to be the king. He has to kind of earn that with us. And 17-year-olds can be fickle, and they demand a lot. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board as a team, and we said, okay, we've got to, well, one, this has all sort of come out in the years since, but LeBron is actually a one of the more charismatic individuals you'll ever meet. He lights up a room. He engages and galvanizes groups of people and teams. He can break the tension in a complicated meeting. He had some kind of Magic Johnson like interpersonal skills that weren't coming out while he was silently sitting on a throne staring back at 17-year-old kids. As a matter of fact, if you watch the advertising of his first couple of years, of which Nike spent tens of millions of dollars to do, he actually never uttered a word in his first 2 years of advertising. So he was just kind of put in positions as a kung fu fighter or some young rookie, or there was this one kind of amazing ad where he shows up in the middle of like a church of basketball with Jerry West and Oscar Robertson and all the greats of the game, and it turns into like almost like a religious rivalry that's happening around basketball. And here's LeBron flying through this church, and through all that, he never spoke. And so we sort of went into that third year saying, how can we bring to life the characters and attributes of him such that people can really feel, and I think authentically, kind of what makes him special, not just as a player on the court, but actually as a leader and as a person. And so the outcome, really through the brilliance of Nike's, now 35, 40-year advertising agency, Wieden & Kennedy, was a series of spots that ran for multiple years called the LeBrons. And it was kind of is patterned after what you could think of as like a sitcom with like the Cosby Show, Friends, except that there were four different versions of LeBron that lived together, kind of like the show, like The Nutty Professor. Okay. And there was this wise old LeBron that was kind of funny and crotchety, but he was sort of, indicative of when LeBron played the game of basketball, even as an 18-year-old, it was as if he had been playing it his whole life. I mean, as a 40-year-old wise old vet, he kind of had that, and it was really pretty nuanced. There was young athlete LeBron that kind of represented sort of this, the physical superhero, this guy who could jump from the free throw line and was the fastest end-to-end player in the game. And if you stood next to him, you realize, it's like he's chiseled at 6'8" to play this game. There was this kind of young, immature LeBron that was called Kid LeBron, and it sort of said, even with all these attributes, this guy's just a kid, and still as youthful and vibrant, in some ways immature, as any other kid who was 18 years old would have been. And then there was this kind of, we called it all business LeBron, which was, he had this side of him that was very almost like vindictive, where if he was really going to be challenged, he would lock in and take on any challenge in a way that was really inspiring. And so we sort of took these four characters and wrote lines for them, and then spent days shooting ads down in California. And the outcome was a series of spots that you can still find online called the LeBron, that even after, I think, 17 years of advertising with that athlete, are still, I think, the most memorable spots that people talk about. And
can I ask about this for a second? Because I think for a lot of listeners, it's easy to discount and be like, well, yeah, you're Nike, you've got Wieden Kennedy, you can do anything. You guys are Superman, right? But as I'm listening, I'm hearing like a depth of concern and understanding and just like intuitiveness about your customer that doesn't have anything to do with Nike that all the rest of us can learn from. And specifically, like, now that you're doing it at Vivint, or anybody who's listening that wants to do it in their team, do you have any insights for, like, those of us who feel like, oh, that's overwhelming, you can only do that because you're big giant Nike? Any lessons for, like, as you're trying to teach people to do it now at Vivint, or if the rest of us were trying to teach our teams to do that level of thought? I mean, like, you can hear the emotion in your voice as you're reliving having built that campaign. Like, you knew that inside out and backwards. We can tell just listening to you.
Yeah, it's really all about insight. And, lots of companies' mission statements will sort of claim a customer centricity. Nike has it at a whole different level. And those were the formative years of kind of my career. So I've brought that with me kind of wherever I go. And so do you truly understand, not at a really functional level or even a Clayton Christensen jobs to be done level, but at a deeply emotional level, what it is that you're delivering to the customer? And once you can find that truth, that is in matching what is the kind of the deep-seated need that they have, and how your product is particularly attuned to really solve that, a lot of your marketing challenges or your messaging challenges or even sometimes your sales challenges sort of evaporate over time, because you've nailed the insight of what the consumer was really looking for, and you've peeled away the dross and the sort of the superfluous parts of your offering and really gotten to kind of what that core sort of really is.
Okay, but I want to ask about that, because it's pretty easy for, I'm the new guy working for Jeff Lyman to say, like, no, I've got it, right? How do you help people, how do you help people measure? How do you help people become objective about knowing that they understand at that emotional level versus just giving themselves a pass and, oh yeah, I know about them. I'm sure I know them at an emotional level. Any kind of like tells or any kind of like milestone that's like, yeah, this really lets us know we actually know. We're not just lying to ourselves.
Yeah. I think it does really start though from an instinct that's just sort of born out of experience and obsession. And then you then refine that instinct objectively with data. And, you can, so we started building a doorbell camera about 4 years ago. And, we had some premonitions about what we thought consumers wanted. But we had to go through kind of the same kind of deep insight gathering exercise to really understand how consumers thought about their front door and really what was happening outside of the envelope of their house. And we, I think we went into the project thinking, yeah, let's just let them see and talk to people at their front door. And what we realized is there's probably something a little bit deeper. And what was deeper was that for many customers, especially when they're home, their home is their sanctuary. And it's this, for some people, it's actually the place that they keep the world out. And so, we started to index higher in our experience than we originally thought that we were going to do on, like, how do we, as quickly as we can, present to the homeowner what's going on in the front door, and then give them all sort of the optionality to decide to take action, but most importantly, to decide to not take action. And that's everything from presenting the thumbnail and the push notification and all of these kind of different layers where, we saw that consumers would get a notification of someone who was at their front door and choose to like overtly ignore it because it was either they want some time to themselves and they don't want to deal with it, or they're away from the house, or it's their kid's friend and their kid is not home. So they could open the door and say, hey, Jeremy, sorry, Josh is at band practice right now. Or they would just want to skip that entirely. And so we thought that the doorbell camera was going to be all about creating connections to people. And it's like, yeah, wouldn't you want to see and speak with everyone at your front door? And the answer was actually it wasn't. It was about providing the peace of mind and giving them the awareness to let them confidently ignore the front door.
Yeah,
and that's a very different insight that we sort of learned in that whole process. And
Okay,
then
but I love this, like being open to information instead of just shoehorning your data into your preconceived notion. And I think my question there is, how do you help your team want to embrace the possibility they could be wrong and being open to that data instead of just filtering it through the answer they'd like to get?
yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that probably plagues um, a lot of companies. One, I think as a leader, you have to create a culture where you not only like welcome counter groupthink and counter opinions, but you demand them.
So, like, what's
And
an example? Because I like where you're going with that, but how could that play out in the staff meeting or in the product review meeting?
when you're a leader and you learn to read signals, without people saying anything, you can tell what they're thinking, or you can tell that they are not aligning to what people are saying. And they may not even have the reasons why they're not aligned, like fully baked in their head and ready to make some articulate comment, but you can see it. And as a leader, I think you have an obligation to actually pursue those signals and say, hey, are you aligned with that? Or actually ask someone to play devil's advocate and say, I think these are great points, but does someone want to argue the other side just to make sure that we're being thorough here? And that person who's thinking those thoughts will like, oh yeah, I will. And and they they become actually it takes all the pressure off of them because you pulled them into it, and now they're not expected to be perfectly ready with some like canned answer, but
Yeah.
you've made it organic, and you've pulled them into it and say, Dan, just argue the other side. What do you think? And they may kind of take 30 seconds or a minute to kind of work their own thinking and point of view out, but that will sharpen, at least as the instincts are being formed and the insights are starting to be sort of thrown out there to be solidified. And then when you go to do, sort of your empirical validation here, you have a better chance of not being totally biased to everywhere that the group was kind of going in kind of the first place. And that's kind of the art of kind of running a staff meeting where you're pulling out of people what maybe naturally they're not going to vomit out, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, and I know we're coming to the close of part one of the interview here, but maybe a good place to end is, most of us in leadership, we didn't get here by being a doormat, right? There's some ambition, there's some follow through, there's some like, adapt and overcome kind of gene being activated, right? So I'd love to hear any tips you have for the rest of us of like, just how to help ourselves be a little more humble as leaders and to not just do that once because it sounded good, but to be able to build that into a routine of, hey, I think this is great, everyone else thinks this is great. How do I like bake it into my DNA to be more humble and go, okay, just because I have this emotional feeling about it doesn't mean it's done. Let's pull back. Let's pretend I'm not just the boss saying let's do this. Any advice on becoming more humble as leaders and setting that example for the team?
Well, one, I think you have to start by embracing that every leader sort of evolves from being super deeply knowledgeable about a few things to slightly less knowledgeable about a lot of things,
Mm.
And so everyone comes in, every CMO either comes in with a really strong brand background or strong analytics background, and they probably had to learn the other side of that. And that's kind of sort of the great craft of marketing is you have to nail everything related to the soft skills in making that really meaningful, visceral connection between the consumer and your brand and your offering. At the same time, so you have to love to be a storyteller, but you better love data and be voracious about it. And so anyone who sort of comes to that position, you have to embrace what you're not particularly good at and don't pretend, and sort of seek input and hire around you, in ways that help you not avoid your weaknesses, but actually embrace them. And then two, there is an art in, I think, asking for feedback from peers and from even people that you report up to, or even people who report to you, where you can create an equal footing relationship rather than saying, I suck and you're great, so can you tell me how I can get better? That's not the way you go into like a feedback session. But you can, I think, in the right moments engage. Hey, I think we're making progress. I feel really good about X, Y, and Z, but I need your advice on how I can do better here, and where are other places where I can kind of dig in, because I want to be great. And that when people hear that one, it gives them a license to probably give you the feedback they would have to otherwise create a scenario by which they give it to you. But it also, I've always kind of felt, if you have a tumor and someone else knows that you have a tumor, pretending that you don't have a tumor doesn't help anybody. And so some people in their leadership or interpersonal or functional skills just have tumors. But so often in like the workplace environment, we just pretend that we're not going to embrace it. And actually the most valuable thing for the person is to say, hey, this is the thing that we got to figure out how we get past, because I think you have a ton of potential, but only if we can overcome this thing. And so I think just there's and the thing is, and this is what I found, when someone knows that they have a problem, they know it. They just don't quite know how to ask to get help. And so it's the most successful people in organizations that I've worked in are not people who sort of came into the organization perfect, but they're the people who were the fastest at embracing what they sucked at, and the most open and confident about like just seeking real feedback about having to and how they can close those gaps. And they turn that cycle much more frequently with many more people, rather than going years without someone telling them that they have a tumor. And so that's, to me, the advice that I would throw out.
Love it. Well, let's end this episode there, and everybody tune back in for part 2. We're gonna keep asking Jeff about lessons from Nike and inventing the future over at Vivint. Jeff, thanks for making time.
My pleasure.